From the Sky News Centre.
Radio Live News, up to the minute.
Kia ora, good morning. Welcome to News Hub.
Can you tell us what is primary immune deficiency and how does it affect you?
Okay, well, it's basically, as it says, it's a deficiency of the immune system, which means that part of our immune system is either missing or not working correctly, and primary because it has a genetic cause. And that's opposed to something like a secondary immunodeficiency, which would be caused by something like cancer, drugs, and disease. So those of us who live with a primary immunodeficiency have a significantly reduced ability to fight off infections. Lynda and I have got the most common type of primary immunodeficiency, which is called common variable immunodeficiency. And that essentially means that we're unable to produce antibodies in sufficient numbers in response to an infection. So to put that into perspective and using COVID as an example, until COVID came along in the early days, so last sort of March, April time, everybody was living in complete fear of it because nobody had any ability to fight the infection. We live with that on a daily basis. That's our fear factor. It's not just COVID for us, it's any infection. And obviously in relation to COVID, if we were to catch it, then we would be much more likely to end up in hospital and requiring medical intervention. And that's why we've been shielding for the last 12 months. I think one of the important things to say as well about immunodeficiency is that we can look perfectly healthy, and we can look perfectly healthy despite having a serious underlying infection, and that's because we don't have an intact immune system. So we don't exhibit the normal signs and symptoms of infection like temperature, chills, sweats, and so on. And because of that, we actually look really well, but in fact can be very seriously unwell. And that can be an issue if we get admitted into A&E because, generally, if you look well, they won't take you very seriously. So as I said, infections can hospitalise us really quickly. We find it very difficult also to get over infections, and it takes us a lot longer to get over infections than it would for anybody else. We can also harbour infections for a very long time before realising that, that we've got them or that we're ill. So, we tend to drop off a cliff is what I'm trying to say when we have an infection. And that doesn't, sorry, I was going to say that sounds really negative, but there are some positives and that we do have treatments available. So,
thank you, Sue.
What is primary immune deficiency in a nutshell?
Well, basically, it's as it says, it's an immunodeficiency, so a deficiency of the immune system, and primary because it has a genetic cause rather than a secondary immunodeficiency, which would be caused by something like cancer, drugs, or disease. So for us, it's genetic, and it means that part of our immune system has been affected.
Sue, if I could start with yourself, I think we'll just have a little moment discussing about what primary immune deficiency is, or PID. Can you explain how it affects you?
Yeah, well, I should say first what it is. It's basically, as it says in the name, it's a deficiency of the immune system. So part of our immune system doesn't work properly, and primary because it has a genetic cause. So it's a genetic defect in our immune systems. How does it affect us? Well, the most important thing to say is that those of us living with a primary immune deficiency have a significantly reduced ability to fight off infection. And that's because part of our immune system is missing or isn't working properly. And to put that into perspective, to give an example, the general sort of fear and concern in the population in February, March, April time 2020 is the fear that we live with on a daily basis. At that point, nobody had got any defence against COVID. That's the fear factor that we live with on a daily basis. For us, it's not just COVID, it's any infection. Any infection, and COVID in particular, If we did catch it, we would be much more likely to end up in hospital and needing medical intervention. And essentially, that's why we have been in the clinically extremely vulnerable category, and we've been shielding for the last 12 months. I should also say that we recognise that shielding in Scotland doesn't finish until the 26th of April. So, I sympathise with people who are going through the same sort of things, concerns and worries that we're going through at the moment. But I also need to say that immunodeficiency is quite a cruel disease in the sense, or quite a cruel condition in the sense that we can often look perfectly healthy, and that's despite having a very serious underlying infection. That's the result of us not having an intact immune system. So we don't exhibit the normal signs of, of an infection. And if we get an infection, we can get hospitalised very quickly. We tend to drop off a cliff, so we will manage, to a point and then all of a sudden just drop. And also we take a very long time to recover from infections. So somebody who is put onto antibiotic therapy for a breakthrough infection will usually find that it will take at least 2 weeks of antibiotic therapy to recover. And that does sound negative, and there are some positives, and we do have treatments available, and I'll hopefully talk about those a bit later.
Sue, if we could begin with you first of all, please. Just tell us, what is primary immune deficiency, and how does it affect you?
Right, well, it's basically as it says. It's an immunodeficiency, which means that we have a problem with our immune system. It doesn't function correctly, or part of it can be missing. And primary because it has a genetic cause, as opposed to a secondary immunodeficiency, which would be caused by something like cancer, drugs or disease. So essentially, it's a genetic problem with our immune system. And in terms of how it affects us, those of us who live with primary immunodeficiency have a significantly reduced ability to fight off infection, and that is because part of our immune system is missing or isn't working properly. Lynda and I have got the most common type of primary immunodeficiency, which is called common variable immunodeficiency, and that means that we are unable to produce antibodies in response to an infection. So to put that into context and to give you an example, and I'll use COVID because, it's an obvious one. When COVID first came along, February, March, April time last year, everybody had a major panic about, we have no protection from it. We're going to lock ourselves indoors. We're not going to see anybody ever for the next, goodness knows how long. That sort of fear factor is the fear factor that we live with on a daily basis. For us, it's not just COVID, it's any infection. And then, as you said in your introduction, if we were to catch it, we would be much more likely to end up in hospital and need medical intervention. And that's essentially why we've been shielding for the last 12 months. One of the important things that we need to say about primary immunodeficiency is that it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really. I know this is radio, but if you could see us, you'd think that we both look perfectly healthy. But that can be the case despite us having a serious underlying infection. And because our immune systems are not intact or don't work properly, we don't exhibit those normal signs of infection that everybody else would. So, the concept of temperature, chills, sweats, muscle aches and pains, just feeling generally rough, whilst we might feel that, all the while, we don't feel that generally in response to an infection. So because of that, we can look really well, but in fact be very seriously unwell. So infections, if we get them, when we get them, they can hospitalise us very quickly. We also find it incredibly difficult to recover from infections. We don't recover in the same way that any normal person would. So we can also harbour an infection for a very long time without realising it. So what tends to happen is that we will, we'll go along to a point where we're almost at dropping point. We drop off the cliff, and that's when we end up in hospital. It sounds very negative, but there are some positives, and the positives are that there are therapies available. You mentioned plasma-derived therapies at the beginning, and Lynda and I both rely, because we can't produce antibodies or we don't produce sufficient antibodies of our own, we rely on replacement antibody therapy, and that's a lifelong treatment. You know, once we've had it, it doesn't mean that we become immunocompetent. So, you know, it's a significant and it's you know, a difficult condition to live with.
What is it, Sue, and can you tell us how it actually affects you?
Indeed. Well, I mean, basically, it's as it says. It's an immune deficiency, which means that part of our immune system isn't working correctly, and it's primary because it's got a genetic cause. So essentially, it's a genetic deficiency of the immune system. In terms of how it affects us, those of us who live with primary immunodeficiency have got a significantly reduced ability to fight infection. And that's because part of our immune system is completely missing or isn't working properly. Lynda and I have got the most common type of primary immunodeficiency called common variable immunodeficiency. And that essentially means that we're unable to produce any antibodies in response to an infection. So to put that into context and use COVID as an example, we were in the same boat as everybody else at that point, because the general sort of panic at the beginning, nobody had got any protection against COVID. Well, for us, that's the sort of fear factor that we live with on a daily basis. It's not just COVID, it's any infection for us, because we can't mount a sufficient response to it. So the other thing I should say is that in relation to COVID, if we did catch it, we'd be much more likely to end up in hospital and requiring medical intervention. And essentially, that's why we've been shielding for the last 12 months. I should also say that there are I think there are over 400 now different types of immunodeficiency. And they differ in the way that they affect your immune system, so which part of your immune system is affected. And how it affects you individually depends on a number of other factors, including any delays in your diagnosis and any other sort of medical conditions that you may have. One of the important things to say about primary immunodeficiency is that we can often look really, really healthy, and that's because our immune system isn't working. So the normal response to an infection would be things like temperature chills, sweats, congestion, and so on. We don't respond in a normal way to an infection. So, we can look quite healthy, but actually, have a really serious underlying infection. So the other thing is that that's important in terms of any admissions to hospital, because often, when you look well, people don't take you seriously. So infections, infections, COVID indeed can hospitalise us really quickly, and we'd also find it really difficult to recover, as any normal person would. We also can actually harbour an infection for a very long time without realising it, so that can be difficult. And then, with that in mind, we can also go downhill really quickly as well. I should say that all sounds really negative, but on the positive side, there are treatments available, and they can vary from sort of antibiotic therapy for an infection right the way through to something like a bone marrow transplant, and that would depend on individual sort of diagnoses and obviously age as well. So in between those two extremes of antibiotic therapy and bone marrow transplants are those people like Lynda and I who rely on replacement antibody therapy, and that is often taken alongside antibiotics and any other medications that we may need for any comorbidities or other conditions that we have. The infusions that we have, the antibody therapy that we have is done by infusion, and those are for life. It doesn't mean that once you've had it that you become immunocompetent. I think that's probably about it.
Let's turn to Lynda now. Lynda, what's it like now that shielding has ended? You must have mixed feelings.
Yeah, very much so. It's very strange. In some ways, so much has changed, and yet to shielders, so very little has changed, because most people, especially those with a PID, have been a year in shielding, because even when we were given the break in between times, it didn't seem right that we did. because to us the infection was still around, and it seemed better to stay in, especially with talk of the second wave. So now we're in the situation where March, it was considered not safe for us to go out and about, and all of a sudden on the 1st of April, it is considered safe for us to go out and about, use public transport, go into shops. Really, shielding ending, the biggest impact will be on those who were receiving financial support, because that's obviously ended. It's very hard. You've got friends and relatives saying, oh, we can meet up now, we can go for a meal, and we can go to the pub. And you know, I'm sitting here thinking, we can't. You can, if you'd like to. And you see on the news people going to pubs and going out for meals, and you know that social distancing isn't being adhered to. So you know that they're likely to come back. Some of them will have picked up an infection somewhere along the line. So it's very, very worrying for us. I mean, some people who were advised to isolate didn't, because financially they couldn't afford to, and some simply didn't want to. But for those who have been, this is a very difficult time, to be honest.
Is it a lifelong condition, Sue?
It is indeed. It's a lifelong condition, and what it means in terms of how it affects us is that we have a significantly reduced ability to fight off infection. And that's because, as I said, part of our immune system is either missing or isn't working properly. Lynda and I have got the most common form of primary immunodeficiency, which is called common variable immunodeficiency. And that essentially means that we're unable to produce any antibodies in response to an infection. So to put it into sort of context, and I'll use COVID because it's a good example, until the vaccine came along, or until, you know, anybody else had had COVID, nobody had got any defence against, it was a new concept. And that's the sort of, you know, that general fear that was in the population, you know, back sort of March, April time last year. That's the fear that we live with on a daily basis. For us, it's not just COVID, it's any infection. And if we were to catch the infection, we'd be much more likely to end up in hospital and requiring medical intervention. And essentially, that's why we've been shielding for 12 months or more.
We hear a lot about over-prescribing of antibiotics these days, and how dangerous that can be if it renders antibiotics useless to us. In effect, that's the sort of situation you found yourself in, isn't it? Because you've not really been able to beat off anything for so long, and that's the sort of way we could find all of ourselves in a few decades' time if antibiotics fail to work.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Lynda and I are probably both, well, I know I am, and I'm sure Lynda is on daily antibiotic therapy anyway, and that does come with its own concerns, because for us, there will no doubt be a time when, you know, we run out of antibiotics that are effective for us. So yes, that is a huge concern, but, you know, sort of generally, we don't rely on antibiotics to keep us well. We rely on what is essentially it's antibody replacement therapy. So because we are unable to produce antibodies, we have to infuse antibodies into our system, and that's done on a regular basis. That's a lifelong treatment, and without it, we simply can't fight off infections or disease.
Yes, absolutely, and thank you very much for sort of spelling what that means for you, spelling that out, Elizabeth. And you know, as you say, it's sort of a double whammy in a sense, isn't it? Because, you know, you can outwardly you can look what we would define as well and fine, and yet obviously inside you're fighting and you're battling. And as of course, as you mentioned there, for shielding in Scotland, there's still about a week to go, just under a week, I think, until that comes to an end. So, Lynda, if I could turn to you, how has it been for people south of the border now that shielding has actually come to an end already?
Well, it's very strange and surreal. So really, in effect, nothing has changed for the shielders, apart from the funding has stopped for the ESA and the SSP. So they have to go back to work. which is a very frightening situation. It's hard to get your head round how, in England on the 31st of March, it wasn't safe for us to go out. And on the 1st of April, it was perfectly safe for us to go out. Not only use public transport, go into shops, go and get your own medications. But at the same time, the rest of your population had their rights extended. So people were able to meet up in groups of 6 to go to the pub and a restaurant if they were outside. And we just cannot see how that's right. If they had stopped shielding for a couple of weeks or something and then extended the freedoms that people could have. But it's very, very worrying. You see on the TV up in Soho, all those people having a lovely time. And whereas, I love to see them having a good time and I don't begrudge them one little bit. You just know what a danger spot that is for all those people to be together. Will be bringing that virus home to all the various communities that they live in. Also, we're hearing of new variants all the time. And this morning I heard of a new variant, an Indian variant. So it isn't safe. They don't know, obviously, whether the Indian variant will be dealt with by the vaccines. It's hard. Very, very hard.
Lynda, let's bring us right up to the now. What is it like for you now that shielding has ended?
Well, it's almost as though nothing has happened, nothing has changed. When you realise and you make yourself think that it has, it's very worrying. Now, I'm quite lucky in that I'm retired, so I don't face having to go back to the workplace. So I've just got to get myself reintegrated with society. And it isn't easy after being secluded with just me and my husband for the last year, going out extremely little just for a breath of fresh air or something like that. To be told that 31st of March isn't safe to go out, 1st of April is, it just doesn't make sense. This is the thing, struggling to make sense of the situation. So we've got friends and relatives all saying, all very happy, obviously, which is great. We can meet up now and we can go for a meal and we can go for a drink. And I really don't feel that we can. They can, but I certainly can't. And so I can now use public transport. Never in a million years, I can't see me ever going back onto public transport. And it's those kind of things that you did every day without a second thought are now relatively open to you. I know there are still restrictions, and it's all too much. And I also think that to end shielding and to relax the regulations around COVID and give more freedoms at the same time wasn't the most sensible move, because now at a time when we should begin to make our way out into perhaps a high street, perhaps the shops, whatever, there are groups of people sitting outside pubs. I don't even feel it's safe for me to walk past that pub full of happy people having drinks. You see on the news, groups of people, and it's great. I'm really, really happy, honestly, that people can go and do this. But in the back of your mind, that they are likely to bring infection back to the areas that they all live in. Thus making it not safe for you. So it's a very difficult time. Plus the news constantly of different variants coming up. I heard for the first time this morning of an Indian variant coming up, and they called it something like a double mutation. I thought, is that doubly worse or what? But it all adds to this feeling of shielding may have ended, but the world, the country, my local town is still not a safe place for me.
And I think you've highlighted really well there the mental health implications of this whole pandemic, really. Lynda, let's talk about employers. what more can they do to support people returning from shielding?
Really, it's honestly a case of speaking to your employee who's come back from shielding and listening to what they say. Just imagine someone who has been indoors a year with maybe on their own, maybe with one other, maybe with a family, all of a sudden coming back into a working environment where their colleagues have probably been at work, if not all through the pandemic, through a good part of it. So they're already kind of relaxed and in their step, in their comfort zone. The employer hopefully has already put in the COVID secure measures. So that all needs to be explained to the returning employee. Now, I know if I were returning to work as a PID patient, whenever I go anywhere, I'm looking and I'm risk assessing everything to my condition. So I would look at whatever measures my employer had been put in, but I would be looking for what he hadn't put in, what might be a detriment to me, what might cause me to become infected with COVID or anything else for that matter. So they really need to kind of try and understand that quirk, because that will pass. They will gradually settle in and see that everything's okay. And if it isn't, it's very, very hard because people don't want to lose their jobs. We've seen people lose their jobs. You know, I don't know what the unemployment figures are, but no one who's shielding wants to join those figures. So they may be afraid to speak up. So just encourage them to talk about their feelings, listen, and see what you can work out between the two of you.
Okay, thanks for that, Sue. Lynda, you know, what's it like now shielding has ended? Basically, you can now follow the same rules as the rest of the population. So what's that like?
It's rather scary and very strange because we've been isolating, and those that have followed it strictly have been staying indoors, apart from going out for an hour's exercise a day, only meeting up with one other person and then coming home. So now to be told it's ended and we can now go to the shops and we can join in, we can go on buses, trains, it doesn't make sense because, you know, it feels like we're just being dropped in it and completely forgotten about. The main effect of shielding ending is the financial support that has been given to people who are required to shield of working age. I'm retired, so that part doesn't sort of bother me, but that is the main nub of shielding being ended. I might mention that Wales and Scotland still, their shielding hasn't ended. So it just sort of doesn't make sense, and most people don't feel safe or happy to make now their own risk assessments with intentions of is it safe for them to go out or not. Some people didn't shield who were asked to shield, some because of financial reasons and some because they didn't want to shield. So, you know, those people are probably integrated quite well now, where the rest of us are just not quite sure what to do, to be honest.
And you've already said there, Lynda, that you know, it's quite scary now that shielding's ended and you're basically following the same rules as everybody else. So what would you say are the main mental health implications of like isolation and re-socialising? Is it the anxiety factor for those living with PID? I mean, everyone said it, and I truly believe it's a massive problem. People feel very scared, very confused, and the tone of the very many letters, text, emails, and other means of communication we received while shielding, especially at the beginning. So on the 7th of April, I got from NHS Coronavirus Service, you can open a window, but do not go outside your property. Please ask others
to take rubbish to the bin and to walk any pets. Now that struck such a note with me. I can barely explain how I felt. Always consider myself a very normal, down-to-earth, not anxious kind of person. But I thought, what on earth is going on? And now people have got to work their way back from that. And people that are chronically sick, so therefore being asked to shield, have their own anxieties at the best of times. And now this is an added one on top. And also to know that as a patient with a PID, you aren't safe to be going back out anyway, because other people now have their immunity from the vaccine. We don't get that benefit because of the way our immune systems are damaged or incomplete. We don't get that benefit. So we've still got all of those fears to work our way through. I think people are going to need serious help to help them put their minds at rest and get back out into the real world, so to speak.
And I think the other important thing to say is that, we can see from the news, this morning and over the weekend that coronavirus is on the rise again in some areas, particularly in London. We've got surge testing going on. So, there's all those sort of added factors that, we've got to consider.
Yeah, and you've had to isolate and then re-socialise, as it were, as well. So what are the main mental health implications of doing that if you've got PID?
Well, it's very, very difficult. I remember the first time, for the first 3 months, I did as I was asked and didn't leave my house. And when that lifted, I still didn't go out. I intended one of my daughters was going to take me for a walk with her, and the place we'd planned to go was too busy. So when she considered it had settled down enough, so off I got in the car, that was no problem. Off I got to the place where we were going to walk, and I saw a person and it was very hard. I mean, I must have looked like a rabbit caught in the headlights. And I scuttled off the path into the grassy bit to keep away from them. I'm not so bad as that now, I've settled down a little bit, but not very much, People who have been told to stay indoors, we got no end of letters, emails, texts, phone calls from various government services, NHS, government, local authorities, maybe your own care providers. And one of the first I got, started off, you can open a window, but do not go outside your property. Ask others to take rubbish to the bins and to walk any pets. And I remember thinking, my goodness, what is going on for us to be able to open a window, but don't go outside your property? And many people on UK PIP's Facebook forum asked, are we allowed to go in the garden? That strikes fear into you. And many people with these long-term illnesses, lifetime illnesses, have emotional issues to deal with anyway, without this on top. So, it's going to be very hard. And even now, how long has lockdown ended? I heard on TV this morning, there are now concerns, as well as the South African one and this one and that one. There's a new one, there's an Indian variant. Which is coming up. So it just pushes you back all the time into thinking, well, it's not safe. And it's hard from that point of view. More is going on. You're being encouraged to go out and about, but it really isn't safe.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, it's that sort of, transition. There is no transition period for sure. No. 31st of March, it wasn't safe. 1st of April in England, it is. And it's that sort of, and I know the dates differ, but it's that sort of odd, that odd sort of concept of, how could it not have been safe yesterday, but it is safe tomorrow? I think maybe sort of a alignment almost, and equally we're being asked to consider going back into normal life again when everything else is ramping up. That's the worst possible time for us.
Okay. Okay, Lynda, if I can turn to you, because you're also a patient who suffers from this immune deficiency. What's it going to be like for you now that shielding has ended and you're expected to go back to work or what have you?
Well, I'm very lucky. I'm retired. So work isn't an issue, but everything else is. It's a very scary time. It's a little bit surreal and very strange because we have been asked to shield. We have been asked not to go outside, only in the latter months, in the latter part of shielding, we were able to go out for a walk once a day, no more, meet with one other person. And to be told that now, almost at the flick of a switch, it's safe to go about our normal business and to go to work is very, very overwhelming. Myself, I walk with a stick. So when I go out, people generally aren't good at social distancing. And my stick comes into play. So if I'm in a queue, my stick goes up. So people can't get in. But I shouldn't have to do that. But that's how you feel. People are dangerous. And it's very overwhelming. You just sort of look and you see people on the news enjoying themselves, having a nice time. And you think, my goodness, they're all going to come back from this weekend and then the numbers are going to go up. And then you hear about new variants coming in and it just reinforces that it isn't safe because, as Sue said, for a PID, we are not going to get any better immunity protection than we have, which is nothing. And to see people, so glibly, as it seems, having such a lovely time, but forgetting about the social distancing is very, very worrying for us. It's very, very strange time.
Yes, indeed, yeah. And just sort of staying with that point, obviously, the situation is still moving quite quickly, and as you say, with the different variants and reacting in real time to things like that, and the changes in restrictions and etc. And when, of course, you have a primary immune deficiency, and suddenly, the government says, okay, it's fine to go out now. That must have an impact mentally, for one thing. That must be very, very difficult to sort of wrap your head around, because obviously you're dealing with an immune deficiency, and then you're told, okay, you can go out, but it's it doesn't quite add up, does it?
No, it doesn't, and it just doesn't make much sense after you've been so very, very careful for the last year to keep yourself out of trouble. I know, the end of shielding signals that the infection rates have gone down and the NHS is in a better situation to look after you. But for us, it just means we have to still be careful because, we will need the NHS to look after us should we be unlucky enough to catch COVID. So, it doesn't all add up to us shielders.
And I think the other thing to say there is that, we're seeing news reports of surge testing in various places. And that, that's sort of, okay, that's fine. But, the worry is that we know that this virus is still out there. We are very prone to catching it, and we are very prone to getting hospitalised from it and getting very, very unwell from it. So I think, from the sort of how to deal with it, I think we're scared, we're concerned, we're confused. It's a difficult one. It is.
Sue, if we could pivot slightly, I understand there's actually 4 nations lift on the plasma ban. Can you tell us why that is so important for PID patients?
One of the things that's important for us is that because we're unable to produce our own antibodies, we completely rely on infusions of donated plasma in order to stand any chance of staying healthy. So without that treatment, we've got an extremely limited ability to fight infection and disease. So the last 20 odd years, due to the long-standing UK plasma ban as a result of BSE, mad cow disease, The plasma that's been used to manufacture our immunoglobulin therapy has been sourced from outside of the UK, and that's principally been from the US and from Europe. So we've recently fought a long and a hard battle to get that back on the agenda again. And thankfully, in February, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority approved the lifting of the ban, and UK plasma can now be used for manufacturing purposes. So, that's great news for us because from, the point of view of the global demand for immunoglobulin, that increases every year. And it's good to see that UK plasma can now be sort of added into that, into that mix, so that from a security of supply angle and a sort of a longer term sustainability angle, we feel that we've got some kind of ability to assist. So it's really important that anybody who donates their blood. We're very grateful for that. We're extremely grateful for anybody who donates blood. And, we'd also like to suggest that people consider donating plasma as well, because we now have around the country, I think it's about 12 different centres where plasma can be donated, knowing that will now be put to very good use for, for people such as Lynda and myself who rely on antibody therapy, on immunoglobulin therapy to keep us as healthy as we can be.
Can employers play a part, do you feel, in terms of, helping those returning from shielding?
Well, they can do, definitely, and hopefully they will do. I do feel for employers through all this. I used to work in HR, and I'm so glad I'm retired. I think if employers will speak to people returning from shielding prior to expecting them to turn up to work, many employers may not even have realised that their employee was in the category where they would have to shield, were so ill. As Sue mentioned earlier, especially people with a PID, we look so well most of the time that an employer wouldn't necessarily know how sick their employee was who had a PID. So I think, yes, if the company has an occupational health or HR, then I think, they would be the ones to initially speak to them, including their line managers. I mean, it's a big thing for someone to walk out of their house straight back into a busy retail shop, a busy office, wherever they work. So employers will have put a range of measures in place already to make their workplace COVID safe. So it's a matter of communicating them very clearly to their returning shielder and listening to their fears, because the person returning may take one look and bolt, out of fear, but they have to sort of talk them into it carefully and listen to their further concerns, because many will have them. And it's the feeling of being overwhelmed, and just got to gradually ease them back into the normal working world, I think.
Talking about getting back to normal and working, how do you think that employers can support those returning from shielding? Lynda?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because many employers may not have realised that they had that employee had a medical condition so serious it was going to require them to shield. So they really need to talk to their employees about the situation of them coming back. Again, some people didn't shield because they wanted to carry on working, and they've got on just fine. And no doubt the employer has made the workplace as COVID safe as is required and as is possible. But that may not, just saying that may not be enough for your ex-shielder to happily jaunt back into work. So that you need to speak to them. When people have a PID, it's very hard to explain, because we look so well. It's hard to imagine how ill we are and we can be. So that's a big hurdle in itself. But hopefully, the bigger companies have got occupational health and HR departments will be able to talk to them and reassure them. So even though all those COVID-safe procedures are in place in the office or the shop or whatever, they will need, I think, to be explained to the employee and let them hear them if they've got any other concerns. Okay, you've put X, Y, Z in place, but I'd like you to do A, B and C. Just listen to see if that can be done to put their mind at ease, because all their colleagues have probably been working all the way through this and are quite relaxed now with, you know, the potential dangers, and they feel quite safe coming in and out of their workplace. But your shielders aren't going to feel like that.
I can imagine it really is a bit of a nightmare for you because you are unable to have the vaccine, or if you did, it wouldn't do any good. So you really are very vulnerable. Bearing that in mind, what kind of support should employers offer you if they want you to return to work? Say you were working still rather than being retired.
I used to be in HR, so I've got a little bit to say about that. But firstly, may I say that to the best of my knowledge, everyone with a PID is being asked to have the injection. There are one or two exceptions, but we are being asked to have the jab. So when you go back to work, I mean, this shielding was a big surprise to a lot of people, and I would imagine it's been quite a surprise to some employers to realise that some of their, or one of their, or however many of their employees has a significant medical condition causing them to be counted in amongst the shielders, especially when you've got a PID, because you look so well. As Sue said. So, you know, they're saying, well, she was hale and hearty and now she's locked up for a year, sort of thing. So I think the most important thing they can do is to listen to their employees' concerns, because there's more likely to be concerns than not be concerns. So if they've got occupational health and HR, then they're the ideal people to talk to them, but in conjunction with their managers. It should be a whole thing so people can understand that they've gone from being inside for a year. Maybe they took advantage of that. We were told it was safe to go out for exercise. Maybe they didn't. I know many people didn't. And all of a sudden they're back into the workplace. So no doubt COVID-safe workplaces have already been set up, but explain all that to your employee. Many people, because we look so well, even, friends and family, so it's even harder for employees, I guess, often write people with a PID off as being a hypochondriac, being attention-seeking. They really do need to listen. And it's such a complicated illness or condition, it's hard to explain to employers exactly what is wrong with you.
Okay, thank you.
Listen and help.
Thank you.
Indeed, yes. And just sort of staying with that point with testing, if I could just stay with you, Sue, for this point as well. What would you say about the COVID-19 vaccine? Would you advise that people with immune deficiencies get the vaccine? Would you consider it an option, a safe option?
I should say that we're not medically qualified, so the best thing we can say is please speak to your immunology team if you've got a primary immunodeficiency. But the advice that we have from our medical advisors is a resounding yes, we should get it. The vaccine works on different levels. So whilst Lynda and I know that we probably won't mount a very significant, if we mount any response at all in terms of antibody production to the vaccine, we may be able to mount a cellular response, and that's just the way the vaccine, the way that vaccines work. So the best we can hope for is, a small benefit from having it. So, I think I would say yes, have it. But if you've got any concerns at all, please do check with your immunology team. And in terms of protection for us, we are going to be reliant on a couple of different things. And the first of those is we are waiting for COVID antibodies to start appearing in our immunoglobulin replacement products. So because we can't produce immunoglobulin, we have to take medication to replace it, and that's regular infusions. And then secondly, the other thing that we're waiting for is for everybody else to have the vaccine. So, have to say, please, if you don't have an immunodeficiency, get the vaccine, both to protect yourself, but also, to protect those around you. Anybody can be vulnerable. And those of us who don't look as though we're vulnerable, we are very reliant on getting that level of herd immunity established.
Okay, a couple of quick questions then, ladies. Should people with immunodeficiencies actually get a COVID-19 vaccine?
That's an interesting question. Obviously, we're not medically qualified, but the advice that we've had from our medical panel has been a resounding yes. Lynda mentioned that, because we don't produce antibodies, we won't get the full antibody response from the vaccine. But and this would depend on different presentations of the immunodeficiency as well. But the best that Lynda and I can hope for is something, it's a sort of a cellular response called a T-cell response. So from the antibody angle, we need to be patient. We will start to get COVID antibodies through in our immunoglobulin infusions in time. That will take some time for those to start to come through. The most important thing to say is that, we fully advocate everybody getting the coronavirus vaccine because, the herd immunity, the concept of herd immunity at whatever level that may be, and there's lots of discussion about that, but that is important for us because, herd immunity will give us an added safety factor in terms of getting out there and living life again. So, yeah.
And this 4 nations lift on the plasma ban then, why do you feel this is so important for PID patients?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can answer that one. I think I said before. We can't make antibodies, so we do completely rely on infusions of plasma-derived antibodies. To give us any chance of fighting infections, staying as healthy as we can. So for the past 20 years, there's been a long-standing ban in the UK on the use of UK plasma, and that was in response to the BSC or mad cow disease. So the plasma that's been used to manufacture our immunoglobulin has been sourced from outside the UK, mainly the US and Europe. We, along with a number of other organisations, have fought a very hard battle to get the ban lifted. And it's important because the global demand for plasma-derived therapies is on the increase every year. So getting UK donated plasma is great news, both for the sort of security of supply and the sort of longer-term sustainability. And if anybody were to ask me personally, where would you rather have your plasma sourced from? I'd much rather it came from people who are donating it, of their own free will, rather than somebody being paid to donate it in the US, for example.
Right, well, we've got vaccines now, of course, as well. Can people with immunodeficiencies get the vaccine? Is it safe too?
Yeah, I should say that we're not medically qualified, so we can't speak for everybody with an immunodeficiency, and we would say check with your, immunology teams. But the resounding sort of answer from our medical panel has been yes, you should get the vaccine. Whilst Lynda and I may not produce any antibodies to it, the vaccine works on a number of levels, and the best we can hope for would be a sort of a cellular response. So it's called a T-cell reaction. And that would be good if we were to get that, because it means that, we may not be able to produce antibodies, but at least we're getting some benefit from it. So I think the general perspective is have it, in the hope that we do get a response. I should also say that from our perspective, we will, in order to feel, fully safe, we're reliant on a couple of things. Firstly, the COVID antibodies will start to come through in our immunoglobulin replacement therapy that we receive for our immunodeficiency. That will start to come through in time, so we'll start to get antibodies that way. And we will also, for us, the biggest thing is to say to everybody else who doesn't have an immunodeficiency, please get the vaccine. The concept of herd immunity is really important for us because, once we've got that magic number, whatever it may be, and we have this concept of herd immunity, then, we will feel a lot safer about going out and starting to get back on with our lives normally again.
Right. And tell us about this plasma ban that's now been lifted. Why is that so important for you?
Well, as I said before, we are unable to produce antibodies, and so we do rely on infusions of donated plasma-derived antibody therapy. Basically, that's immunoglobulin therapy, to give us any chance, really, of fighting infection and staying as healthy as we possibly can. So without that treatment, we have a very limited, extremely limited ability to, fight infection and disease. So for the last 20-odd years, due to the long-standing ban on UK plasma as a result of BSE and mad cow disease, the use of UK plasma has been banned for manufacturing purposes. So our products the base product, the plasma for our products, has been sourced from outside the UK, essentially in the US and in Europe. And so we've been fighting a hard battle along with a number of other organisations to get the ban lifted so that we can again use UK plasma for manufacturing. It's a rather odd scenario because plasma has been banned for manufacturing but not for other uses. So it can be used for other uses but not for manufacturing.
Right.
So from our perspective, it's really important that the ban's been lifted because the global demand is rising, year on year, and for immunoglobulin products. So UK donated plasma is great news from both sort of security of supply angle, but also the sort of the long-term sustainability of the plasma market. And I always say this, but from my perspective, where would I rather have my plasma sourced from? In the UK, people very generously donate plasma, altruistically. They're not paid for it. In the US, plasma donations are paid. So I know where I would much rather my products came from.
Absolutely. Well, Sue and Lynda, thanks very much indeed for talking with us. If our listeners need further information and support, where can they go? Do you have a website?
Yeah, we do have a website. It's www.ukpips.org.uk, and it's UK Primary Immunodeficiency Patient Support Group.
Sue, may I ask you, we just heard Lynda there talking about the fact that you are expected to have the vaccine, but is there any point to that if you can't make the antibodies yourself?
Yeah, no, I should say that we are expected to have the vaccine, and the vaccine works in a number of different ways. We're not medics, so I can't, I will probably not explain it to the best of my ability or to the best of a medic's ability, but the vaccine works by at a cellular level, but also in terms of producing antibodies. So that's the different sort of way that the immune system works.
Okay, so there is a benefit then to you having the vaccine.
There is indeed a benefit. We might have a cellular response if we're lucky, but neither Lynda nor I would be able to produce, a significant number of antibodies as a result. So it's important that we do have it, but we may not get full benefit from it. So from our perspective, the most important thing is that firstly, that we wait until we get antibodies coming through in our immunoglobulin replacement therapy. And secondly, that we have to encourage everybody else to have the vaccine, because the concept of herd immunity, at whatever level that may be, is really important for us. We need everybody else to have protection so that we can feel safe to go out again.
Fine, thank you. Finally, I gather that you were saying that immunoglobulin is one of the most common and effective treatments for people with your condition. There has been a ban for 20 years on that. Can you give me the history of that in a nutshell?
There's been a ban on the use of UK plasma for 20 years. That ban has just been lifted, and that's been through the result of the work of both our organisation and a large number of other organisations.
Why was it banned?
Essentially, it was banned because of mad cow disease, BSE, and the sort of the worries about variant CJD and the implications that may have. There have been globally not a huge number, not as large a number of variant CJD numbers as were expected. And what's happened in the UK is that we'd banned plasma for manufacture of immunoglobulins, but it's been used for a number of other things. So it's a slightly odd scenario, but the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority has recently reversed that ban, and so we can now start to use UK plasma again. For the last 20 odd years, we've been reliant on plasma that's been sourced outside the UK, so in the US and in Europe primarily. So, I mean, from our perspective, it's absolutely wonderful because, the global demand for immunoglobulin is just increasing every year. So, UK plasma is great news from both the sort of security of supply, but also from the point of view of sort of longer term sustainability. And I know if somebody were to say to me, where do you want your plasma sourced from? Somebody in the US who's being paid to donate plasma, or somebody who gives it, sort of altruistically in the UK, and I know where I'd much rather my plasma came
And it's
from.
come at just the right time, the reversing of that ban for you, hasn't it?
Has indeed, yeah. So we look forward to, to seeing UK plasma coming through in our products, in the next sort of, hopefully the next 12 to 24 months or so.
So the good news is that there's further information and vitally support, isn't there, for listeners?
ukpips.org.uk, which is UK Primary Immunodeficiency Patient Support. That's the address of our website, and we have lots of information on there for you and contact details.
Well, it's great to have some good news to finish on. And Lynda, I mean, we spoke about it there, but many people will want to make a difference and support the cause. Where can listeners go for advice and support?
They can come to our website at www.ukpips.org.uk. That's the UK Primary Immunodeficiency Patient Support.
Right, thanks for that, ladies. Just as we finish off then, if people want more information, what would you say to them?
Yeah, if they Google UK PIPS, they will find us. Hang on, I'm just looking for the whole address. www.ukpips.org.uk.
And I should perhaps say that, UK PIPS is United Kingdom Primary Immune Deficiency Patient Support. So UK PIPS.